Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our Safari family in Nigeria, Kenya, Canada, and India. I hope you're all okay wherever you are. Welcome to the most anticipated episode of a Safari we are excited to share with you. Safari is a podcast by journalist Wairimu and Orie Atieno. Safari is a Swahili word meaning journey. The podcast explores life issues from an authentic, witty, and holistic perspective. Njoo safiri nami. Come journey with me. Asante sana, and I look forward to having you on Safari Podcast. Remember to listen in on Spotify, Anchor, and YouTube. And on this episode, we bring you the Safari of Oyeyinka Oyelowo, a litigator, a journalist, and a woman whose force is to reckon with. I am sure it's going to be an interesting, law-abiding, life-changing conversation with her, so keep it Safari. Welcome, Oyeyinka.
Lovely to hear from you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you for joining us on Safari Podcast. My name is Orie Atieno.
Oh, lovely, Orie. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. I've had an opportunity to hear about the great work that you've done. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
So how is Canada?
Canada, right now, it is doing relatively well, I would say. Canada is experiencing higher interest rates, which are being increased by the Bank of Canada. So in a financial sense, that's not the most exciting thing, especially if you're someone who has any sort of banking products that have interest rates attached to it. But on a positive side, the weather is warming up. So it's a really excellent time to easily go out and get access to your vitamin D and sunlight via walking by parks or just enjoying yourself generally. So there are definite positives in regards to the weather looking up. There are a little bit of, prospective negatives if you don't plan for them in regards to the interest rates. But all in all, right now, there's great things happening in the city, especially with hot dogs. I'm quite excited to be able to see at least one or two documentaries.
That's awesome. And we are really excited to have you today. Yeah.
I'm excited too, actually. So if I'm speaking too quickly at any point in time, please just know it's my enthusiasm about having the opportunity to connect with you in this regard.
We're going to have a really amazing conversation here. Just you can tell our listeners about Yinka. I can call you Yinka. Yinka, yes?
Yes, you can. Well, Oyeyinka is my official name. But out of the fact of the difficulty in pronouncing it, Yinka's completely fine. So if you do decide to swerve and use Oyeyinka, that's cool. If you use Yinka, that's fine too as well. Just because Yinka is more so an accommodation for people who aren't used to the phonics of the Yoruba language.
So, Oyeyinka Oyelowo, welcome to Safari Podcast. Tell our listeners more about you, where you were born, and your dreams when you're growing up to now, where you've reached.
Excellent. And so more about me, where I was born, and my dreams until now. So I'll start off with the shorter answers that I can cover up quickly. I was actually born in Nigeria, and I was born in the University of Lagos. I lived there until about 8 years old, and had an opportunity to immigrate to England with my family, and then later on immigrate to Canada. So in regards to where I was born in a university in one of the biggest cities in Nigeria. And my journey here was through immigration and as well my parents' capacity to work in different areas around the world. So that's how I got to Canada. And in regards to my dreams and my aspirations, I will say that they've evolved in many ways since I've been young. I can note that my aspirations in the first 10 years of my life were more seemingly art-focused. Despite having a very strong academic structure at home and with the schooling that I was fortunate enough to have, I wanted to be a poet or a singer or an actor, and at some point an astronaut too as well. So in regards to my dreams, they've always been multifaceted. And I owe it to the fact that I spent a lot of time reading fantasy books and story books in which different characters had the capacity to move past what was humanly possible. So my dreams are at a young age. The first 10 years of my life were very much informed by superhero comics and arts, entertainment, and etc., etc. So in the next 10 years of my life, I was very much avid about making a difference in the world and doing it in a positive way. So my dreams very much shifted to community activism, fields like journalism, documentary production, as well as fields like nursing too as well. I had the opportunity to start out with the Victoria Order of Nurses, in which we were planning programming for young kids using art therapy for after-school programs. So a lot of the work that I did complete from around the age of 15 to 20 was very much steeped in art culture. I worked with an organization called Elevated Grounds, where we actually created a musical of sorts and also performed it. And I also had an opportunity to sort of plan a few media-based works with my friends. Ultimately, when you have to make that decision about the dreams that you follow at your high school age, and I'll say this because the way it works here in Canada and in Ontario is that typically you apply for universities, or you can choose to go to college, or you can choose to work on whatever trade or business you have at that point in time. Typically, because of the statistics, most people apply for university. And I say the statistics in regards to having a financially stable life and background, bereft of any issues such as bankruptcy or criminality. So at that point in time, my dreams were also very multifaceted. I applied to be a writer in the UFT program, medicine in the Queen's program, journalism in the Carleton program, simply because you can say due to my reverence for superhero books and theology books like the Bible, for example, before the age of 10. I had a very vast view of how my dreams could come alive in the world. And so I ultimately chose journalism because I felt that that would be a great path to actually use my talents to help people learn about some of the inequalities and atrocities across the world. And I also did so because out of curiosity, I also wanted the opportunity to actually teach people or have people learn about the different instances of human rights abuses around the world. I ended up working in a documentary production company and for the Documentary Organization of Canada and Cinema Politica for some time. And in fulfilling this dream, I guess partially, or with mind of the realities of the Canadian focus in the media, I actually learned that more education and I guess more knowledge power would be needed to actually establish the sort of impact that I thought would be significant in really moving the needle on the basis of inequalities regarding human rights abuses, relating to race, and relating to gender. So I'm sort of swerving in regards to this very, I guess it's a great question when you say dreams, because for me, I've never been someone who's had just one dream. And I'm not saying it necessarily to be facetious or to tout myself, but I've always believed in the multifaceted nature of your capacity to manifest or create things on Earth. And I've been quite lucky to hold several careers simultaneously with great results too. So my dreams ultimately morphed into being a lawyer. At some point, they were married with reality, and that reality is the systemic structures that are actually in some more Western countries are ones which allow the reflection of success or the reflection of opportunity to be out of sync with the actual population and abilities. So when I say this, it's because oftentimes when you see who has access to some of the top reporting opportunities or top writing opportunities. It's very different than some of the individuals who've actually gone out on their own and actually started to deliver news in that way or do media projects in that way. So upon my experience with this knowledge and educating myself, it's really empowered me that now I am a law firm owner. So to tell you a bit about myself, I've taken you from how I got from Nigeria to here, the ways that my dreams have been multifaceted and married with reality, especially the realities of community building and showing consensus, as well as systemic racism too as well. But at this point in time, I am someone who owns a law firm, and I'm a board member for the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I am working with a media company called All In Media, and I am a director with the company with mind to being legal counsel in the future. And it's an organization that has several other production companies under its umbrella that are creating content here and in the US. So at this point in time, I am multifaceted too as well. In regards to owning a law firm, being involved as an NGO advocate, and as well being involved in the corporate world with a media production company. And I'm still looking for more opportunities to learn and to grow, simply because one thing about myself is that I really love the notion of becoming a better version of myself, whether that be intellectually, by being introduced to different conflicts in which I'm able to handle and circumvent without depleting any of my character or behavioral instincts, or whether that's through engaging in schooling or even something like this, or better yet, I love going to United Nations conferences where I can either write and submission on the basis of the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, or find other organizations that I'm collaborating with so that we're either making webinars to teach people about certain, for example, labor related violations or workplace harassment, etc. So that action of going to conferences as a delegate is also, I guess, something that's very exciting for me right now as a person. So I know I've been all over the place in regards to me telling you about myself, but I hope I really touched on the main points about my immigration journey, the evolution of my career, and who I am now at this current moment.
Yeah, you did a really amazing job, and wow, there's a point you said, be in a capacity to manifest things. That's really amazing and really deep, because most people they just tend to have maybe one, two things they dream to do, but yours is really amazing, and I'm really inspired. Yeah. And as I go to you as a young woman from Africa, a wealthy, beautiful continent, yet the vices of war, corruption, and grave poverty are forced to brain drain, understandably so. How can we redeem the situation that Africa is really facing at the moment?
I think that's a great question, because it needs to be redeemed internally by our own government structures, but also externally in regards to our engagement with organizations like the United Nations and the mannerisms in which export and collaboration is done with countries outside of Africa. But first, it starts off internally, because there is a higher rate of some of these abuses, as you mentioned, in regards to poverty, gender-based violence. Internally, each government body would have to prioritize and set aside a certain amount of money or create a certain government agency that is uniquely prescribed to dealing with that illness, that issue. And what that would mean is, for example, for a country, and I won't use a specific name, just so it isn't as though one country has more of a social ill than the other. But let's say country A in Africa is the country where individuals are prone to experiencing sexual violence at a very high rate. It would do well to resolve that issue, to have the government, for example, set up an agency that first it deals with the victims of those violence acts, so that they can be rehabilitated and actually be a part of society without carrying those traumas consistently. So on a healthcare-based level, there would need to be policy with dealing with survivors. But on a government-based level, to stop the reoccurrence of this sort of evil actions in country A, the hypothetical in Africa, the government would also have to research and assess these individuals that are consistently causing harm and the reasons why. Now, there's a lot of qualitative and quantitative research that sort of shows that with poverty and lack of financial opportunities for growth and expansion in regards to quality of life, there's a heightened level of violence and a heightened level of crime. This is often a given, especially in academic literature. So outside of the two ways that I've mentioned, which is developing healthcare policy internally to make sure that survivors are able to reintegrate and continue with those societies with actual, autonomy to tell stories about how they overcome, but also government bodies actually doing research on the reason why that group causes the same harm consistently to certain individuals, to better understand how policing can be used to stop it, or how there can be financial setups that can happen to ensure that those conflicts don't happen at all, or that issue doesn't happen at all. Now, specifically when there's actual conflict in regards to violence, sometimes sexual violence is used as a weapon in some of these areas. So that would mean that in each fact-specific context where there are certain different atrocities, that's going to mean that internally African leaders are going to need to take on different steps. So the manner in which a country or a province or a municipality may have to take on the issue of child marriage is going to be different from how they take on the issue of unemployment, and different from how they take on the issue of, for example, illness outbreak, or a lower level of education with women, or, for example, violence in schools. So which each and every, social ill that needs to be cured, the prescription that governments have to put in place is going to be entirely different. But in order for that to happen, there is going to have to be research done. And that then takes you to another step, which is who's going to pay for this work. And it then goes into the economy, which is why I also think that internally, yes, there should be investment within African countries for the research and the alleviation of these programs. Not these programs, but these social ills, I call them, or social atrocities that happen. But there also needs to be an indication that they sort of bleed from colonial historical history and disengagement financially with the other parts of the world in a mannerism that's unfair. I oftentimes will, read and inform myself on how natural resources are actually exported out of these African countries and the compensation provided. And if there is a financial based issue where in regards to exporting or in regards to globalization, plenty of African countries don't have the connection to funding or don't have the connection to business markets, then the ability to actually structure the cures to some of these issues is dwindled. Just because in Canada, for example, the government will collect taxes, and then those taxes are supposedly used to pay for like programs, for example, where if someone experiences gender-based violence, then you can call someone that will help you. If you are experiencing a crime, supposedly you can call someone to actually stop the crime or deal with it. Those exist, and I won't be critical of them in any manner about whether or not they do work for people depending on their ethnicity, their identity, and their financial background. But what I will say is that they just exist for now. So in African countries that are dealing with issues in relation to violence, extended poverty, or like gender-based violence, I think one of the main parts to actually resolve the problem is also having access to financial funding. So having either a tax system or a collective amount that's actually used to, one, pay, my apologies, give me a moment, is actually used to pay for the resolution of these issues. So another, I guess, issue is actually advocating on the international stage about colonialism and the resulting factors that Africans still have to deal with in certain countries. I say this because one concrete example, so that I'm not sort of speaking in symbolism, is with the Mau Mau population in Kenya. And with that population, they experience immense abuse by the English government that was actually had their eyes on their natural resources, so rubber, for example. And that sort of atrocity occurred within the country. Obviously, England benefited in its own way, and so did other European countries. But ultimately, that community and that culture was left with a lot of trauma. And that trauma sort of seeps through in the mannerisms in which other people treat each other, and what is normalized as good versus bad in regards to a quality of life. So when you ask me this question about Africa has the highest percentage of these atrocities, and there's a reason for it. Qualitatively and quantitatively, there's sort of a vast history about the colonial damage that was done financially. But now in the present day, with the opportunity to move forward with technology particularly, I think African governments really need to more so mobilize to ensure they have the funding to be able to now start helping individuals with, one, who are survivors of these atrocities, and understanding the people who actually do so. But ultimately, I do think there is a high connection between individuals who don't have access to work, quality of life such as healthcare, good clean water, at times technology, and their propensity to engage in crime or engage in violence or for things to go wrong. So yeah, it's quite a lot that African governments can do and people can do, because I find for you, even the creation of this podcast is an example of the ways that you're disseminating information to people so that it's of mind and they're aware that it's an issue that needs to be resolved. And I think that everyone should be playing their part, even if you aren't African, in regards to lending a hand, whether that be with policy, suggestion. But internally, if African countries and governments were to deal with the situation, it promotes autonomy and a lack of injection of, for example, things other than just finances. Because culturally, to preserve traditions, it's important that that government basically plans out ways to deal with these issues, and they can use Western models, for example, or even African models for doing so. So I hope I answered your question. Did I leave anything out?
I think you really managed to clear it out, and that's an amazing way to handle it, because there's a lot of issues and people blame each other, blame the government and all that, but the only solution, I believe, as you've said, it's within. It has to start from within.
Precisely. So within the country, actually implementing structures that fundamentally will deal with these sorts of issues. So internalizing the solution is one great thing, but also externalizing the fact that, in regards to trade and bringing in more money to the country, that's extremely important. And as well in regards to collaborating with other countries for different campaigns is also extremely important. So, for example, if Canada were to collaborate with a few African countries about the development of women's rights or the development of women's education, that collaboration in itself would lead to more opportunities for women within the country, but also a learning chance so that it can be replicated for others too as well.
Yeah, that's for sure. And law is your forte right now, yeah?
Yes.
What area do you specialize in, and how did you know this was the path you wanted to take? Because earlier on you told you told Safari Podcast that you had a lot of dreams, like you didn't just have like one. So right now you're doing law. So how did you know that was the path?
So it's because of a culmination of different, I guess it's because of a culmination of different experiences that really ingrained in me the importance of justice. So right now I am doing law, but I'm also within the business administration field as the director of All In Media Group. So to be fair, why did I choose law? I chose law because I wanted to be able to deal with injustice in a way that I couldn't necessarily do before, because having a legal degree is a privilege. You get a license, and then it then emboldens you to be able to, I guess, file claims in certain arenas that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. So I pursued law because of a variety of different reasons. One, it sort of stems from my work experience with the Toronto District School Board and running after-school community programs, and having an opportunity to meet some of the best minds in the city who were just, subject to different circumstances than others. Around the time when I was, still working at the production company, The Best Part Inc., I actually came across a newspaper article about one of the individuals that I mentored losing their life to gun violence. And that really hit me hard because, one, this was an excellent person who unfortunately, due to their circumstances or just a misfortune, lost out on his life. So in seeing that, it really created a sense of injustice and unfairness in that, one, the individuals hadn't been caught, it hadn't been dealt with as quickly as possible. But outside of that, injustice was also something that I was privy to working with Cinema Politica. I would do their communications and assistance-based work, and in that role, I would be handing out media and advertising campaigns for different films. And one film in particular really piqued my interest in joining the legal field. And that film was Silence is Gold, which dealt with some of the mining abuses in South American countries. And an individual, the filmmaker, had brought light to it. But during the actual screening, it was brought to our attention that she was sort of limited in using her voice and speaking to the attendants about the creation of the film and the court case that occurred on the basis of an injunction. And that also piqued my interest in regards to law. As well, being in different employment situations or experiencing situations where my friends would deal with different forms of financial setups or wanting to move to other countries, I had an opportunity to actually just touch base with my understanding of law. So ultimately now, that's my one thing. I'm a lawyer. It's been really informed by the myriad of work I've done in the past. The experience of having someone that I mentored and that was an excellent individual losing their life, the experience of seeing a documentary filmmaker who was attempting to bring light to some social abuses, being essentially told they couldn't speak and they should be quiet, as well as assisting and helping people as a volunteer with different legal issues. All of these experiences of seeing social economic unfairness, as well as seeing some people being able to yield great results with financial mobility by pursuing the law field, I was like, okay, this is something that I would want to learn about, and it would be a skill that I would need to have in order to be able to solve the problems that I believe exist. And with idealism, that's the reason why I went to law school and I became a lawyer, and I now have a license to practice. I was also quite lucky enough to receive a 2-year appointment as a decision maker with the tribunal. And I spent about a year focused on hearing cases for individuals who had experienced disabilities and their appeal to the government that the actual Ontario Disability Support Program was incorrect in stating that they weren't substantially disabled. Now, even with that line of work, it informed my work as a lawyer, because there's no better teacher of the importance of a great lawyer than being a decision maker. It's literally the difference between a testimony and a short hearing yielding a positive result, or an extended period of time in which parties need more support than necessary. So in regards to being a lawyer now, my path has been sort of paved by a myriad of different experiences. Unfortunately, most of those experiences have been problems that needed to be fixed, and only the law could fix them in a way that's permanent for each of the parties involved.
Wow. Wow. You know, when I was young, I wanted to be a lawyer. So I'm really inspired with your story, and it's like it's been a roller coaster. Yeah.
Precisely.
And so, have you ever had a professional win and loss that you'd like to share with us in your field, and how did you deal with it?
Oh, that's excellent. That's a great question. And I like the fact that you said that when you were younger, you wanted to be a lawyer, because now I feel like you're something much cooler. And there's some people who actually joke that it's when you leave law that your life begins, because it can be something that is very all-encompassing, that you have to dedicate your time and parts of your life to. But your question about one significant win and one significant loss, that sort of helped me grow in any capacity. And I would say that I've had quite a lot of both. I would say my biggest loss is when I cannot represent a client that's in a precarious situation in court, and we have to take on a dispute resolution path, given the fact that one, the individual may not be able to carry on with the litigation claim, or due to financial-based reasons. So some of my biggest losses are when I see cases that should be heard by a judge but can't be due to circumstances. So having one party with more funding than the other, or willing to pay a certain amount to sort of settle the situation with confidentiality in part. And I think that's one of the bigger losses that I at times experience. But it's a loss that is, of course, balanced out with the fact that an individual gets an opportunity to resolve the issue without dealing with trauma, or without going through the adversarial process, which can be very daunting and depleting for the parties involved. But ultimately, outside of the losses, one of the wins is, for example, in last year, December, having my advocacy help with the release of someone in criminal court, for example, or having my advocacy help in regards to collaborating with organizations at the UNCSW. So, and that's the United Nations Council on the Security of Women. So my biggest win, and the most recent one, was I received the 2023 Barbara Schiffler Clinic Award yesterday, actually. And that, it was really edifying, because I was like, oh, yes, that's how I felt. I was like, really? Have I done enough completely? Is what I actually felt. And I will continue to do more, because that award was one of my bigger wins. And I would say awards even within the law school environment, because even then I would note, like, we should all be feminists, given the fact that qualitative and quantitative research shows that when you invest in women, you invest in your country, you invest in your family, and you invest in the world. The more educated women are, and the more access they have to financial, economic, and educational opportunities, then it sort of pours out and is passed along to the communities around them. So in regards to my biggest wins, I would think getting licensed, winning this award recently, and starting my own law firm, having an opportunity to preside over decisions. So I had that role, and also getting a chance to help someone get their freedom. So rather than going to jail or getting a peace bond or any sort of mark on their record, I was able to ensure their freedom, and I think that was a great experience for me.
Congratulations on your award. That's really amazing, and your law firm, really amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. I think that's a lovely thing to say, and I'm quite grateful for you saying that.
Such an incredible conversation with Yinka and Orie. Brace yourself for part 2 of this conversation, where Orie together with Yinka will examine inculcating a legal knowledge, the role of media in educating masses. They'll also look at human rights and overcoming obstacles, and discuss Yinka's latest innovation of a legal technology app which will revolutionize understanding of law. And finally, how does Yinka cope? She look at her physical, mental, emotional wellness, tips and coping mechanism here on Safari Podcast.